FMCG or tech?
Tech.
Brand strategy or brand identity?
Close. Identity.
Long-term or short-term?
Long-term.
In-house or outsourced?
Outsourced.
Traditional or innovative?
Innovative, obviously.
Customer first or product first?
I'm going to say product first.
Proactive or reactive?
Proactive.
Print or billboards?
Close. Billboards.
Rat or fish?
Fish.
Thank you. JT, welcome.
Thank you. I'll take the fish.
I just came to me,
Dover please.
Yeah, I don't know why you go for rat. Why would you go for rat? Mate, thank you so much. I wouldn't usually do this, but I'm going to do this because I think it's important. But you are, I would say, my first ever mentor from back in the day. We met in the VMLY&R. You were the first ever CEO that I met. I was a young, spunky 21-year-old. I could not believe that you took the meeting. I was, oh my God. And I was there in my little blazer and shit. And we sat in the VMLY&R and I just word vomited at you. And I actually wanted to say thank you. Before we go into this, I wanted to say, thank you for taking that meeting. You were the first ever person to make me feel like I had potential to be talented. I don't think you made me feel like I was talented. I think you just went, keep on going, man. Like, whatever you're doing, like, keep on going. So thank you. I want to say thank you for that.
Oh, that's great. I mean, my experience of that meeting was similar. I remember seeing this incredibly fresh-faced, enthusiastic, incredibly good-looking, so dreamy. I couldn't take my eyes. I was kind of like, oh my gosh. And I think what maybe you didn't appreciate was we had a real desperate need at that point to potentially find a new creative partner, either from within or externally. And what I really needed at that moment was someone that was just going to come with a completely fresh take on it and not necessarily bring all of the, well, this is how the runners and riders work and, this is what we've got to do. So I really appreciated that. And I think that's what kind of glued that moment together was I was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for, is a completely fresh set of eyes on this. So I don't know what the lesson of that is. Maybe it's like everyone's got their own needs coming in and whatever. But, I think I had the same reaction to you, which was, thank God there's somebody new, somebody fresh is going to take a completely new look at this and support me. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I remember having deep imposter syndrome before, during, and after. So, you were accommodating for that, and thank you. I remember going back to the agency, and I was like, yeah, they've invited us to like go to their agency, and like recruiters at that point were never allowed to go into like the floor of an agency. You get pushed into a room and be like, yeah, who are these fucking estate agents? Don't talk about them.
I can remember there was a funny bit towards the end where I think, so this would be like the brief for, I think it might have been ECD maybe of the company at the time. And towards the end, it was something to the effect of, so I can have this brief exclusively?
Yes. Please? I think you said that.
I can have this brief exclusively. I thought, yeah, okay, because I was thinking, I really need this guy to take a look at it. I want this fresh perspective. So, yeah, I guess we've just agreed it's yours for a bit.
And I remember I remember that feeling, because I'd never had an exclusive ECD brief in my life. I remember bouncing out of there like, wow. Placed it as well. Mr. Will Thacker.
Indeed, yeah,
wow.
who did brilliant
Or the
things.
Thack attack, as you used to call him.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you. I'm going to dive straight into this because I think I want to cover your the story of And Rising, or 18 Feet And Rising, as it was called then. But before we do, we're going to start with our traditional question, which is, JT, who was the first person that made you feel like you had talent?
Professionally, it was a lady called Miriam Jordan-Keane, who at the time was, I think, probably head of account management or similar, head of one of the groups. They had these big group systems at Saatchi & Saatchi. I think the group was called Radetzky. They had a kind of, they were so big at this point, it was almost like mini agencies within the Saatchi & Saatchi infrastructure. And I think she was head of one of those. And she gave me a fiercely intelligent woman, incredibly, very powerful presence, but also unbelievably warm. So she was this mix of steel and love and openness, and she was also incredibly funny. And she did a few things. One was she described her job. She said, oh, look, on a bad day, I love advertising. And on a good day, I can't believe they actually pay me to do this job. And when you're looking into an industry trying to figure out what you want to do, it was like, wow, whatever that is, I want to be part of that. So that was the first thing, was she bridged the universe of what advertising was and helped me see that actually it could be something for me. And then the other part of it was, she gave me a break and said, "You come and do some work experience." And it was unpaid and kind of a little bit unofficial, but I got up there and just made myself as useful as I possibly could, which was obviously not all that useful and mostly hovering around. But then we would do meetings and catch-ups. And in those meetings, it was as if you were shoulder to shoulder with her. And there was no question that you were on some sort of learning journey. It was almost like, okay, you're here, you can do it. Now almost prove me wrong. And I think there's a huge clue in the way she did that. And we used to talk about her as sprinkling sort of magic dust on people. She has an amazing way with people to make them feel amazing about themselves. And that's what she'd do. And I think she did it by sort of saying, well, you're there. Let's start there. You're there. You can do it. Now, what do we need to know? What do we need to do? It was never like, okay, so here's how it's going to work. Here. So the difference is, rather than an expectation to live up to, she almost just gave you a possibility to live into. And that was her real skill. And so I'm incredibly grateful to have had that chance, because sort of almost from the get-go, I had an early stage sponsor that was giving me a possibility to live into, rather than, okay, here's how you're going to do it, and here's how you're going to, here's how you get to the next step. And it's a huge lesson for bringing people on. There's a conductor called Ben Zander, and he's got a great speech online about this that I think is quite well known in the teaching community. And he's a conductor, and he depends upon the power of the orchestra in order to create, the outcomes the audience wants to hear. So that's kind of one of his things. Is it's not about me; it's about the orchestra and how that all comes together. And when he goes in to teach others how to teach, and he says, look, on day one, all these music students turn up, and they're hugely accomplished, and they've studied and practiced to get into this music school. And I see them sitting next to each other, and they're all kind of looking at each other going, am I better than that person? Is this person better than me? Am I going to cope with this? And he says to them, okay, here's some good news. You've all got an A. You've all passed. You've all got with a distinction. And now what I'd like you to do is to write a letter to that person. And most people think, okay, I'll write the letter to the person, and I know I get it. I'm going to then, be the person in the letter, that kind of thing. But that's not it. The twist is, he says, I then teach the person in the letter, not the person in front of me. And it's that same thing, which is I'm going to assume the person gets there and assume the person to be at the top of their game. And that's the person I'm going to, that's how I'm going to work with that person as if they're already there.
Wow.
So it's quite, and I think that was kind of Miriam's thing. She was like, oh yeah, no, if I'm talking to you, it's because I'm assuming you're there. And the rest will work out. Yeah.
She could see you in the future and is like, I can see you, I'm going to get you there, kind of thing.
She put you in a movie called Becoming You.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're a CEO now of Rising, which is an agency that's been through so many different chapters and stories. Yeah. But before you became a CEO, you were what would be called a suit or somebody in client services. What was that role? Why would you enjoy doing that role? And why were you good at that thing?
So I was a very proud suit, proud of the role, proud of the job.
Why?
Mainly because I had a really specific playbook, and I think it's partly because I have great empathy for the journey that creative people go through to create. It's partly sort of half a creative background myself. My dad was a sign writer, my mum was an entrepreneur, and I'm a sort of like odd mix of the two things spliced together. And my playbook, if you like, the other thing was I was always surrounded by incredibly talented creative people that really knew what they were doing, and I very quickly, within a couple of years, managed to get into some of the top agencies, and those agencies just had they'd amassed a department of talent that really knew what it was doing in all ranges, at all levels. And so I kind of figured out, whenever I was speaking to creative people, it would always make a ton of sense to me. Like, what they're saying actually makes an awful lot of sense, that we should go in that direction. And everything else always seemed a bit of a distraction to me. It was quite a lot of noise. So my playbook was to get onto the field, work out what was going on, see the lie of the land, and almost then to get the ball into the hand of the creative person as quick as you possibly can. Let them run up the field. And when they then hit a barrier, I'll come in behind you like the number 8 and we'll push until we go all the way. And that was an incredibly effective strategy to push through great creative work, basically. Make sure you were giving the creative people full autonomy to develop something, whatever they thought was best, and then we'll put that forward and we'll scrummage it and go and kind of sit the same side of the table and go all the way. And I think on balance, you know, it's not for every type of situation, every type of client, but I think on balance it was at that time, you know, it would lead to great results basically because the company, individuals, clients would get these incredible creative outcomes out of the back of it. And then there'd be situations that didn't really require that and didn't want that. And, you know, once or twice it would kind of lead to a fair bit of collateral damage because it was a fairly uncompromising system.
I can see how that works for the creatives, and I can imagine that eventually the clients will be happy for that. I want to ask about, because we'll move into Rising. I think it's a really interesting story, but where you've obviously worked at Fallon and some incredible places at a time, can you think of a moment where you were like, this is the fucking career that I wanted, this is incredible, I'm loving this?
Yeah, it was well, I always wanted to start a company, and I knew that from the beginning. And I think, you know, John Clayton, who's one of our backers, says entrepreneurs are born, not made. So I think that's kind of was always in there somewhere. But there was at one point where I thought, oh, maybe I'm not going to. Really? Maybe I found a different idea here, and it was Adam and eveDDB. I was somewhere around the account director into board director level. I had an incredible portfolio of clients I was working on. They were all the sort of ruck and drive creative work through method was working great for them. For us, it was all kind of in sync. And I thought I would like to go on and run this company. And that's, at that moment in time, the combination of support, what I was learning from everyone around me, the opportunities, the matches that we were getting to play, the accolades that we were winning, the ascent of the whole thing was, and the tone, it was really the tone of, I don't know so much about the internals of Adam and eveDDB today, but I know that cultures don't change very quickly, and it had a tremendously allowing culture whilst also being, the quality standard was just incredibly high. And so again, it was this combination of sort of warmth and standards and belief. And so it was it was an incredible period. And then it started like all these things, you know, particularly in advertising. I don't know loads about football, but it seems to be anything that's worse than football. So it goes up and down and left and right, and so it didn't last. But there was a good 3, 4, 5 years, I think, where it was they're really golden years, you know.
And so making those things golden, you're talking about good work, the people around you, the stuff that you're making. What made that moment burst or balloon burst?
It's a great question. I'm trying to remember what the sequence of events was now. There was really around, it's the company at that point suffered its own crisis of identity. Something had stopped working for it at some level that wasn't visible to everyone on the shop floor, if you like. And the energy in that place was the very best work, the very best campaigns. And suddenly it felt like the focus was shifting somewhere else. And partly it was, I think, a crisis the industry was experiencing around the arrival of digital coming up into a really significant force. And so it suddenly started to become a conversation about channels. And I think our response to channels was, well, it's just what you're putting in the channels. Don't take your focus off the content. And that was the sort of shift one. Shift two then was there was a change in name. So Adam and eveDDB was actually called BMP-DDB at that point. And BMP was as famous as Adam and Eve. It was known as, it was the front end that was known, and the DDB part was like less known really. And there was some funny things, like it was always in yellow so it wouldn't show up on headed paper and stuff like that. So it was always the quiet kind of group in the background. And because it had done so phenomenally well in London, the group left it alone for the most part. And suddenly, globally, they decided that it would be neater, corporately neater, just to call everything DDB, and they disbanded all the front parts of the names. And it was amazing how it shouldn't really make any difference. It certainly doesn't make any difference to clients. But somehow, it really shifted the energy, and it sort of signaled we're not going to be about the outcome anymore. We're now going to be about networkness or something else. Yeah. And after that, leadership then kind of started to spin. We had some new CEOs arrive. And so somewhere between the loss of what is this about and lots of changeover in management, it really started to change into something I didn't recognize as much and wasn't as interested in. And so it was at that point I then looked for the replica of it, and that was at Fallon. Fallon was then at that point like it couldn't get any more hardcore creatively. It was almost like a couple notches even more hardcore. I mean their model was great work at any cost, including the people. It wasn't. Whereas Adam and Eve DDB was definitely the people. I think their thing was kind of like people, product, profit.
Yes.
This kind of, and creativity and humanity were the values. So it was pretty up there. Fallon was great work.
Full stop.
If everything has to, whatever else we do, I kind of like that about it. It was even more uncompromising,
Where was this in the timeline of Gorilla and Balls?
Just after. So I joined just after. I think I arrived in the September. I was leaving in the June, landed in the September, and Gorilla was that June or July or something.
Wow.
So
the hottest agency probably of a decade at that exact moment.
100%. I mean, one thing you can time by my CV almost exactly is I arrive at the peak. And then you get about another 30%, and that was the same.
What happened? JT basically.
Basically that, you can mark it. It's like, oh, we've got 30% left, guys. It's landed.
So that was a similar story, right? They get bought by a publicist, or the deal was happening around that time.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's similar to a DDB sort of situation. Publicist buys it, the gut's kind of stripped out. I mean, I think Fallon is now like a tiny little 20-person thing within Leo Burnett somewhere now.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was like a 300-person business producing.
It wasn't that big actually.
No.
It was. I mean, its footprint globally and stature and impact was. I don't think there may not have been anything bigger. I mean, partly because of the size of the channels at that point, but I mean, it would have to be in at least the top 3. I think it goes number 1 probably for that period, not only here in London, in the UK, and then just it's the recognition it was receiving, and people were kind of, what is happening in that building?
Yeah.
But it went from, I think I landed at where they were around 65, 70. They had previously been 40 for a while, so it was really boutique, really cool. Everybody knew each other really well, and that was Fallon really 1.0, and I was part of a relatively short-lived 2.0, where they were having to bring lots more people in. They were having to absorb other cultures. I was coming from a very different culture, which they were very sensitive about and alive to. You're coming from a place that's very calm, and a place that people are extremely nice to each other. And sometimes we think they're nice to the detriment of the outcomes and the work. And here we're not frightened to have we're not frightened to get into conflict here. Yeah. How are you going to cope with conflict was kind of so they were having to absorb different styles coming in to sort of take it to the next level. And I think when I left, it was at about 180.
Wow. So this is the birthplace of 18 Feet and Rising.
Yes.
Which, if I remember rightly, are you exactly 6 foot?
Dude, I'm the smallest of them.
Right.
That's the hilarious thing is I managed to find 2 others that were a bit taller, and we pumped it up to 18 feet. It was a roll-up, basically.
Because you had the 2 other
Matt
founders.
is 6'4".
Yes. Oh, so I always said that you were all, so the 3 founders, I always said, it's because they were all exactly 6 foot each. But that's not the case. It was a collective height. So I gave you a bit of an increase there.
100%.
You're
yeah.
welcome.
I'm like 5'10", maybe 5'9.5", depending on what shoes I've got on. So yeah, Matt was 6'4". I actually think, to be fair, Tim was also about my height. So between the 3 of us, we
you made it.
It felt like we were okay, cool.
So let's do the glory moment, I guess. Similarly, like we spoke about. I feel like Fallon and DDB was the moment for you. What was the glory moment of chapter 1 of 18 Feet and Rising? And actually, better question, what problem were you trying to solve, and why did you launch it originally? It
was really straightforward. We wanted to be the new Fallon.
Right.
And the new HHCL, the new mother. There's a company that will launch in a particular decade, usually around the beginning of the decade, and by the end of that decade, it is the unquestioned creative agitator, creative standard. It therefore normally it's normally the most desired place to work. It's then desired by clients, a certain type of client. I don't think, by the way, that companies with those positionings have the answer for all clients, and that's sort of the illusion. But they have the answer for a very specific section of clients, and that makes it all kind of click, and the wheel sort of goes round. And we couldn't see that coming through. And in fact, we were proven wrong, because we saw Adam and Eve launch, and it's we thought that was sort of very middle of the road. We thought this is like, they're kind of like prog rock or something, and we wanted punk, like we wanted to be right out there. I remember drawing this chart that was creatively led, corporately led, and time. And I suppose it's pretty obvious when you think about it, but over time it sort of drifts from top right to bottom left as companies mature and they get bigger, and they will inevitably start to focus on efficiency and consolidation and things like that. And our contention was, well, what's happening right at that top right corner, the really, the outliers that are right over the edge, that utterly uncompromising, pulling together the creative talent that, is there to be unleashed, finds tremendous support there to do things that no one else is going to do, and then really shake the whole thing up. And I think I just had like the plot of the axis entirely wrong for where the industry was. Actually, it turned out Adam and Eve were at the top right, and we were somewhere on some other axis, that couldn't, in some ways really struggled to find market fit then. And it's part of a number of changes that are then going on in terms of digital and where that's going and things like that, but also what types of clients needed advertising, and it turned out to be retailers and so on and so forth. So there was a whole knock-on effect of where the creative tastes were going. But our appetite was for that really quite out there, almost you can't get your head around it type of work that would then eventually settle into something that would have a golden period and extended gold. And the chart was also really clear. The further top right you started, the slower your curve then into the second quadrant. And we noticed some companies would never cross over. So you'd have BBH or Wieden & Kennedy, Mother, because their beginnings were so far right. They never really curled over the axis. And that's what we thought, that was the curve we were aiming for. And yeah, we were coming into a very different era where TV advertising was maturing, I think. We were up for more drumming gorillas and whatever was going to come after drumming gorillas that people couldn't get their heads around. I mean, it's difficult to remember it now, but that particular piece of work just divided the industry it divided marketing in two.
Why?
It was like, do you think it's good or bad? And pretty much half were like, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. It's not glued to the brand. It's got no there was that camp, and then there was another camp. This is just wonderful. It's exactly what the channels are looking for. It's digital. It was the first example of ads being able to go into YouTube and find almost a home where it made sense for that type of work, and so on and so on. So we thought it was a massive unlock. Like, this is the future. And we just didn't see any cultures starting up around that kind of utterly maniacal, uncompromised feel. So that's what we thought. And so our stated goal at the beginning, we started on the first day of the working day of the decade, 2010. And I said by the end of the decade, we will be the creative agency of record for that decade.
What did you get right?
We did a lot of really experimental work. And, and in the pitches, there was a couple of years where we really caught the new business market off guard, because we were going into these meetings presenting something that looked a cross between advertising, PR, and content. And it was really expansive. These meetings would have like loads of ideas on the wall everywhere, and it would almost come from different directions. And some found that same thing as the gorilla, some found that very confusing. I don't understand this. Aren't we supposed to find a strategy? And then everything hinges off the strategy and it's neat and tidy. And others were just very liberated by it. They were like, wow, this is just so refreshing. I don't have to sit and think and wonder what crack the code of life before we can just start seeing some stuff and kind of get into it. And maybe we could actually just build it by running things. And so that was, I think, there we really took the market by storm then initially, because I think people were pretty stuck to, we've unlocked it, here's the key, and the reveal is this, and here's the work. We were like, okay, let's just try that, and that kind of stirred things up. We had a couple of pockets where I think the work, achieved moments where I was thinking, okay, this could get there. Was a couple of Christmas ads, I think, in particular, that were almost antidotes to the John Lewis thing. The culture creatively definitely stood for uncompromising, commitment to doing something different. So I think those things were really good. The things that worked less well for it were and we were alive to this, was almost be careful what clients you win quickly. In the bubble of planning for it, we were almost like no retained clients and nothing too big, so that we can just find our feet, settle in, get a body of work that represents where we're going, and then we can start to find our feet into some of the bigger platforms. But it just wasn't working like that. And You know, it happened to Adam and Eve as well. They came out the gates and then suddenly plop, plop, plop. It was Halifax and John, you know, and the same thing happened to us. Plop, plop, plop. We suddenly had Virgin and AXA Nobel and Nationwide and these huge 20, 25 million pound accounts for a company that was, you know, 14, 15 months old, and we were in our early 30s. It was kind of like we had never been in a C-suite before. And, we actually really didn't know what we were doing. And so at that board, you know, when those companies that require real boardroom level patience, and we were in a real hurry, you know, to get on to make the work that we wanted to make, and these were very, very grown-up clients that required a very long-term view. And so it was almost like the objective, you know, when they talk about business strategy, you need all the things to link up for you. And it was almost like we had the strategy, we had the people. Technology was kind of, I think actually in the round we probably missed some of the technology stuff. I remember in the early days we focused quite a lot on it, but couldn't get anything to ignite. It was that classic, it hadn't moved so far on yet that we could embrace it as a revenue stream, but we could see it was moving away from where we were. We were sort of caught in between the plates of change. But if you're not able to develop the customer base that matches those things, then the whole thing sort of falls apart. And the reality was there just wasn't the demand for that type of company. And there's sort of lots and lots of reasons that go around that. And as the decade went on, it became increasingly clear that that's not what the market was going to require either.
You fired Nationwide.
No, they fired us, and then we got really cross about it and fired them. It was one of those sort of backward forward, I dumped you, who dumped who kind of things, I think. In truth, no, they put us on review. We went on notice. We'd been doing it 4.5 years, and it had run its course. You know, as these things do. So it just came kind, which is a very big lurch because we're about 25% dependent on that revenue. You build a lot of systems around those types of clients. So you have a set of people and a set of processes, and to some extent it has become part of the culture too. So yeah, it's quite difficult when a quarter of it is then going to have to get rewired. But it had run its course.
I wanted to ask you about that time. I'm not sure if have you signed anything? Are you allowed to sort of speak about this moment?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Well, probably not, but I mean...
Yeah, fuck it.
Lawyer up, sue me.
Yeah, exactly. We've all been there, man. I want to know, because we had a conversation about this time. So it was a stressful time for you. You'd lost 25% of your revenue, big financial client. And the thing I wanted to talk about was the power of campaign at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying, you know, Campaign, Little Black Book, The Drum, these these publications, they really did kind of own the industry at that time. Can you tell me about that moment, or at least like how you came to understand about the news?
Yeah, so there's two parts to this. One is actually putting the company in the place that it needed to be for a set of reasons that I'll come on to. But the other one, I think, is about people's perception of those publications and how they shape things. And I think, to be fair, my own perception of how much those things mattered was over-skewed, partly because they did really matter. I mean, there was no getting around it. That magazine was specifically Campaign, I think it's about 40,000 subscriptions, so it's pretty big. And it lands in the receptions everywhere. So it's quite a poster, that front page. So I think to be fair to myself and that publication at the time, you know, that's not happening now. It's some of the newsletter and things like that. But that visible, physical in all of these is quite an influential. I mean, you can't really buy that media space, I don't think. You know, it's a bunch of C-suite people coming through the doors all the time, picking it up and putting it back down. So it was your main advertising channel. And everyone was like, oh, no one reads Campaign. It's like, well, no, but everybody sees it, and everybody's, you know, it's visible and it's big, and it's where people take their sense of, you know, what's going up and what's going down. But that was also beginning to change. So we're probably a little bit oversensitive about Campaign, because at that point, Campaign was our affirmation. Like, are we doing well as a company? We're still only 5 years, you know, coming into 5 years. And so we still really looked to them to know how we were doing internally, and our, you know, and our staff and so on and so forth. So we were really glued on how do we look in front of them all the time. And I think that was probably an unhealthy thing to be obsessed with at that point. But anyway, the reality was that we were talking about selling some of the company to an investor, and the pricing on that was very high. And almost simultaneously, I don't know if I've spoken about this, but the first Friday back in 2015, I had 2 conversations One was at 11 a.m. where an investor slid across the table the heads of terms that sort of met all my needs, demands. It's like a set of zeros. I couldn't get my, I was like, whoa, this is it. This is incredible. And then I went back to the agency, kind of a little bit of a diz, thinking I'm just going to sign that thing straight away, like dope, like we've made, and at 4:00 that day, Nationwide popped in and put us on notice. So within the same breath, we were like, oh wow, okay. So then all of a sudden you're thinking, right, well, if this is leaving at the same time we're trying to get this done, we may miss this whole thing.
Wow.
The opportunity, because deal cycles, they're like planetary moons. They come into focus, and then you're going to have to wait for the next cycle to come around, and it might not come around because at that point people lose interest and things start spinning off. And you can go. We watched it happen. Like agencies will go into a death spiral. And so my thing was I've got to prevent. In some ways it was let's get this deal done, but that really wasn't my priority. My priority was let's stop this going into a death spiral, because a deal falling through coupled with a 25% loss of revenue, the campaign news kind of fueling that, that's a recipe for this is over. And this will just quickly spin down. And at that point, we're 5 years invested into it. Survival salaries, capital in, ups, downs, you're covered in battle scars. And so, I did everything within my power to present an upward face of 18 Feet and Rising had a second chapter. We got the deal done in the June, around the time the kind of we were shaking hands with Nationwide to say goodbye.
Wow.
And
I want to move on to the end of that because I realise that I could speak about that story for hours. I want to know about And Rising now.
Yeah.
Notice that it's not 18 Feet And Rising now.
Yeah.
What did you spot? What happened? And how would you describe And Rising today versus yesterday?
So it's a completely different company today. I mean, first of all, 5'10" left. Not a very compelling name.
5'10" left. Let's rebrand.
5'10" and rising, 5'10" and sinking, 6 foot and under. It was all these gags. I think, oh no, we have to change the name. But there was a lot of reasons for it's a whole shift. Part of it is the founders moving on, chapter 2. Part of it is there was always a thing about And Rising. There was a whole speech around it's not about the founders, etc., etc. And then there's a shift to becoming a kind of growth engine, marketing services, investing support partner to scale-ups and startups. And we felt really strongly that for that you'd had to abandon this kind of goofy advertising agency name that was really about let's go top right, be really, really creative and really out there. So let's have this extremely strange name and a lot of other things that are kind of interesting that just attract all this creative energy. And be a bit more straight on, okay, what are we here for and what services are we providing and what value are we creating at to the client partners and the investments that we're making. And so And Rising just seemed a much more straightforward add-on, and it immediately then said, okay, we're no longer going to be an advertising agency trying to go top right creatively. We're now going to become something else, not all yet known, but it's something that's going to be very focused on scale-ups. And it's almost like whatever their needs are, we're going to build out of those needs very slowly. And we knew some of them were advertising because they were taking to TV and outdoor and traditional brand advertising to really scale themselves and take themselves to the next level, be acquired, go IPO. So we knew that was one of the puzzle pieces and possibly major puzzle piece. It was Sporting Chance, that was the puzzle piece, and that's all we would have to do. And then over time, we've gradually realized there's a whole set of other channels we need to be in. We need to have control of the media. We need to be advising on capital investment. We need to be investors ourselves. We need to have a really strong design studio that can build and create brands. And so, it's all fallen out of almost the client rather than the marketplace. And I guess was the sort of like, oh, great, wake up as an entrepreneur. Here's a clue. Why don't we think about the customer? Because they're not that interested whether the industry builds out its creative potential up top. We had assumed there would always be a market for that. And that was kind of, you've got to think forward 10 years, like as far as you can, and kind of assume it will have all changed and that the customers for these things won't necessarily exist. And so really that whole thing about where's the customer today and where are their needs going, and try to take yourself where their needs are going. Over an industry has a playbook, and the playbook works like this. You start creatively led, you become corporately led. Somewhere along the journey, you either make it and you can come downwards and there's enough cash, or you get acquired and you slide over to the left and leave. That doing it by industry playbook is now not how we don't really think about the industry anymore. We don't try to do it. We don't try to do anything within the confines of a market definitions as the industry would describe them. What we try to do is just go, right, there's a customer of scale-ups and they have needs. What are those needs and how do we meet them? Because what we definitely see is they're pretty underserved. And the model of being invested in them, that was the other thing we were noticing, was like 30, 40, 50%, 60% of our business now was moving towards taking these brands into advertising for the first time. And then we're getting these tremendous exits. You know, and you kind of see the founders exit and you look at the fees, you're thinking, hang on a second, I've got a different idea here. So anyway, we can be in the cap table. And so end of 2019, we started to introduce investments, which we borrowed from a couple of companies, design studios that do it in the States, have done it for a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, and began that journey. And that's a journey of building up your credentials in that space. You can't just come out of the blocks and say, hey, we're investors now.
Where does that journey finish, do you think?